horror stories from the road, all while I drive my truck Scania V8 through the night in first person. Some of the stories come from the internet, told by real people, and others have been sent to me by writers or shared by people on Reddit who I asked to recount their experiences on the road. If you'd like to send me your own story, you can do so through the link in the description, and I'll share it with everyone. If you enjoy my content, it helps a lot if you subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's get into the first story. When I was younger, my family and I embarked on a long road trip from California to Wyoming. We were headed to Yellowstone National Park, a place my parents had been eager to visit for years. If you've never been, Yellowstone is one of those rare, breathtaking destinations where nature feels untamed and wild, stretching as far as the eye can see, filled with towering trees, geysers, and wildlife. My parents always said everyone should see it at least once in their lifetime. At the time, though, I was just excited to get out of town and away from the monotony of school and daily life. The drive from our home in California to Yellowstone took around 17 hours. We had packed our Yukon XL with more luggage than was probably necessary. My parents, my two younger brothers, and I were packed like sardines. The plan was to break the drive up over a few days, stopping at motels along the way so we could rest and recover. Most nights went smoothly. We'd check into a small, sometimes dingy motel, shower off the road dust, and fall asleep, ready to continue our journey the next day. However, on one of the last legs of the trip, we fell behind schedule. My dad, determined to make up for lost time, decided we'd push through the night, driving straight through the long, empty highways of the Midwest. There were no street lights, no nearby towns, just miles of dark road that stretched endlessly in front of us. My brothers and I were already half asleep when he made this decision, slumped awkwardly in the back seats of the Yukon. The hum of the car and the rocking motion of the drive lulled us into a heavy sleep. It must have been around 2 or 3 in the morning when my dad finally admitted defeat. Exhaustion was setting in, and he knew it was too dangerous to keep driving. He found an unlit rest stop in the middle of nowhere, just a small gravel parking lot off the side of the highway, surrounded by dense, towering trees. I remember waking up briefly when the car stopped, but I was too groggy to really care. I glanced out the window and saw nothing but darkness. Even the dashboard lights in the car were dimmed. We all dozed off, the quiet of the night swallowing us whole. Sometime later, I woke up. I wasn't sure what had woken me. Maybe it was the uncomfortable position I was in, or maybe just the silence of the night that felt too loud. I rubbed my eyes, feeling disoriented, and looked around the car. My parents and brothers were still fast asleep, their breathing slow and steady in the pitch-black interior of the vehicle. I stretched out as much as I could, trying not to disturb anyone, but sleep was elusive. The seatbelt dug into my side no matter how I shifted, and the cramped quarters of the Yukon weren't exactly helping. Boredom set in as I sat there, wide awake in the middle of the night. I peered out the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that could break up the monotony. But outside, there was nothing. Just pure darkness. The trees outside loomed like dark giants, their outlines barely visible against the starless sky. It was like we were trapped in a black void, alone in this isolated rest stop in the middle of nowhere. Luckily, I wasn't the type to travel unprepared. I had packed a couple of flashlights in my bag, just in case. Quietly, I reached into the back seat, careful not to wake anyone, and unzipped my bag. I fumbled around until I found one of the flashlights, a small, yellow plastic one. It wasn't particularly bright, but it was enough to give me some sense of my surroundings. I clicked it on, the beam of light piercing the darkness just enough to illuminate the immediate area outside the car window. I pressed my face against the cold glass and scanned the woods around us. The light bounced off the trunks of trees and patches of underbrush, but everything seemed still. There was no movement, no sound. Just the quiet, empty forest, standing in eerie stillness. I remember thinking it was strange that I couldn't hear any animals. No crickets, no rustling in the bushes, just silence. As my flashlight swept across the tree line, I almost missed it at first. Between two trees, maybe 20 or 30 feet away, there was a dark shape. At first, it didn't register what I was seeing. It was just a shadow, I thought, maybe a bush or a trick of the light. But as I kept the flashlight trained on it, my heart began to pound in my chest. The shape was tall and vaguely humanoid. It wasn't moving, just standing there, as still as the trees around it. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing to rationalize what I was seeing. It's probably nothing, I told myself. Just a tree or a weird formation in the bushes. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My hands shook slightly as I held the flashlight, the beam flickering just a little from the tension. Then, as if in response to my growing unease, the shape moved. It turned. Slowly. Deliberately. It rotated 90 degrees, stepping behind a tree, and disappeared from sight. My blood turned to ice. I gasped quietly, quickly turning off the flashlight and yanking the makeshift blanket over my head. I shut my eyes as tightly as I could, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, my grip on the flashlight tightening so much that my knuckles hurt. Every muscle in my body was tense, locked in place as I lay there, paralyzed by fear. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't. Every sound, every creak of the car made me jump. I was too afraid to look out the window again, terrified that I'd see that figure lurking closer. The darkness around us felt suffocating, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. It wasn't until the first light of dawn filtered through the trees that I allowed myself to breathe again. My dad woke up, stretched, and started the car as if nothing had happened. I didn't say a word about what I had seen. Part of me was still trying to convince myself that it had all been in my head, that the figure in the woods was just a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever I had seen that night, it was real. And it was watching. This is another story told in detail by someone on Reddit. It was the dead of night, the kind of night where the sky is so dark it feels like it's swallowing the world whole. I was driving through a remote stretch of highway, one that I hadn't planned to take. My GPS had malfunctioned earlier in the evening, leading me off the main interstate and onto a series of unfamiliar back roads. The nearest town had been miles behind me, and now there was nothing but miles of unlit road ahead. I had been on the road for nearly 8 hours, trying to get to my parents' house for a family gathering. They lived in a small town about 3 states over, and I had already driven halfway across the country without much sleep. The exhaustion was creeping in, and I could feel my eyes getting heavier by the minute. I rolled down the window to let in some cold air, hoping it would help keep me awake. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky had remained dry so far. It was just me, the empty highway, and the hum of the engine beneath me. As I rounded a curve, my headlights caught something up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a road sign, but as I got closer, I realized it was a figure standing by the side of the road. My heart skipped a beat. There wasn't supposed to be anyone out here. The figure was tall and motionless, standing just at the edge of the road, barely illuminated by my headlights. I slowed down, squinting to get a better look. It was a woman. She was wearing an old-fashioned, white dress that seemed to glow faintly in the night. Her long, dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and her face was turned toward the ground, hidden by the shadows. I couldn't see her eyes, but something about her felt off. There was a strange stillness to her, like she didn't belong in this place. For a split second, I considered stopping to ask if she needed help. But an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, rooting me to my seat. My instincts told me to keep driving, to get as far away from her as possible. As I passed her, I glanced in my rearview mirror, expecting to see her fade into the darkness. But she was still there, standing in the same spot, her face now turned directly toward my car. A chill ran down my spine. I pressed the gas pedal harder, eager to put distance between myself and the strange woman. The road ahead stretched on, winding through dense woods. The trees on either side of the highway loomed like sentinels, their branches reaching out toward the asphalt. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman walking after me, but the road behind me was empty. Or so I thought. About 10 minutes later, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadowy figure darted across the road in front of me, too fast for me to fully register what it was. My heart leapt into my throat, and I slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, the headlights illuminating the stretch of road ahead. But there was nothing. No person, no animal. Just the empty road and the dark woods beyond. I sat there for a moment, breathing heavily, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. It's just your imagination, I told myself. You're tired. You're seeing things. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been a trick of the light. I had seen something. Shaking it off, I put the car back in drive and started moving again. I was now fully awake, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The road felt darker, more oppressive, like the night itself was closing in on me. The trees on either side seemed to bend closer, their branches forming an arch over the highway. Then, I saw her again. This time, she was standing directly in the middle of the road, her back to me. The same white dress, the same long, dark hair. My foot slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just feet away from her. My pulse pounded in my ears as I sat there, frozen, staring at her motionless form. She didn't turn around. She didn't move at all. I honked the horn, but she didn't respond. The sound of the horn echoed eerily through the woods, fading into silence. My mind raced. Who was she? Why was she here, in the middle of nowhere, at this ungodly hour? Summoning every ounce of courage, I rolled down the window just a crack. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I tried again, louder this time. "Do you need help?" Still nothing. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as a cold breeze swept through the car. I glanced at the dashboard. The temperature had dropped suddenly, even though it had been a warm summer night just moments before. Suddenly, the woman's head jerked sharply to the side. Not a natural movement, but a quick, unsettling snap, like a puppet on strings. She still didn't turn around fully, but her face was now partially visible. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were dark, empty voids, like they were hollowed out. A low, guttural whisper filled the air, though I couldn't make out any words. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I threw the car into reverse, slamming my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as I backed up, putting as much distance between me and the woman as I could. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. She was still there. But this time, she was standing right behind my car, her face mere inches from the rear window. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream, and those dark, hollow eyes stared directly into mine. I floored the gas pedal, speeding away down the road. My heart was racing, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't dare look back. I just kept driving, the fear coursing through my veins like ice. I had to get away. I had to get off this road. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw the lights of a small gas station up ahead. I pulled in, parking the car under the flickering neon sign. My hands were still trembling as I shut off the engine and sat there, trying to calm my racing heart. I never told anyone what I saw that night. I didn't want to sound crazy. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't alone on that highway. This is another story told in detail by a subscriber who sent me an email with his story. Driving an 18-wheeler through the night had always been something I could handle. I'd been a long-haul trucker for over 15 years, and the quiet, empty stretches of highway in the dead of night were usually a kind of comfort to me. I knew these roads like the back of my hand, every twist and turn, every rest stop and trucker-friendly diner. But that night, on a desolate highway somewhere deep in the Midwest, I encountered something that made me question everything. I'd been assigned a route to deliver a shipment of goods from Nevada to a small town in Nebraska. It was a long haul, but nothing out of the ordinary. I had set out from Nevada around noon, planning to make most of the drive through the night. The roads were usually empty during those hours, and I could cover more ground without the hassle of traffic. Around midnight, the highway stretched out in front of me like an endless black ribbon, my headlights the only source of light for miles. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the wind howled occasionally, rattling the sides of my rig. The dashboard clock read 12:34 a.m., and I was making good time. I hadn't seen another car in nearly 2 hours, but that was typical for these remote parts. The rumble of the engine was steady, and I had just cracked open a fresh thermos of coffee to keep myself awake when I saw it. Up ahead, on the side of the road, barely visible in the low beam of my headlights, was a figure. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or some stray livestock. But as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was standing just off the shoulder of the highway, waving his arms slowly as if trying to get my attention. He wore a dusty old jacket and a wide-brimmed hat, but something about him looked off. His clothes looked old-fashioned, like they were from another era, and his face was shadowed, making it impossible to make out any details. Instinctively, I slowed down, my foot easing off the gas. As a trucker, I'd seen plenty of hitchhikers and people stranded on the side of the road, and while I usually didn't stop for anyone, there was something about this guy that gave me pause. Maybe it was the way he stood so still, or how his form seemed to blur slightly in the glow of my headlights, like he didn't quite belong there. I pulled up alongside him, rolling down my window just enough to speak. "You need help, buddy?" I called out, my voice sounding louder than I expected in the silence of the night. The man didn't answer at first. He just stood there, his hands still raised in that slow, deliberate wave. A shiver ran down my spine. The air around me suddenly felt colder, much colder than it had been just moments before. "Hey, you okay?" I asked again, this time louder. Finally, the man lowered his arm and took a step toward my truck. I could see him more clearly now, and what I saw made my stomach turn. His skin was pale, unnaturally pale, almost gray, and his eyes were sunken, like he hadn't slept in days, or worse. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He stepped closer, his mouth opening as if to speak, but all I heard was a faint, whispering hiss, like wind through dry leaves. My gut screamed at me to drive. Something wasn't right. Every instinct I had was telling me to get the hell out of there. But before I could react, the man pointed down the road, his finger trembling slightly. He still hadn't spoken, but his message was clear. He wanted me to go that way, further down the highway. "Look, I'm just trying to get through the night," I said, my voice shaky now. "I can call someone if you're in trouble, but I've got to keep moving." The man didn't move. His finger remained outstretched, pointing down the road, his eyes locked onto mine through the windshield. I don't know why, but something compelled me to look in the direction he was pointing. I squinted through the darkness, my headlights illuminating the asphalt ahead. And then I saw it, a pair of taillights, faint but unmistakable, flickering like dying embers on the horizon. A broken down vehicle, I thought. Maybe that's what he's trying to show me. Someone else in trouble. Without another word, I rolled up the window and started driving again, slowly at first, my eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there, watching me go, his form growing smaller and smaller in the mirror until he finally disappeared into the night. As I drove closer to the flickering taillights, I felt the unease grow stronger. The highway stretched out endlessly, and yet those lights remained just out of reach, like they were leading me somewhere. Something wasn't right. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached the source of the lights. It was a truck, an old, rusted rig that looked like it hadn't been driven in years. It was jackknifed across the highway, its cab crumpled like a tin can, as if it had been in a serious accident. The taillights, though dim, were still flickering, barely holding on. I pulled my rig to a stop a safe distance away, my headlights casting long shadows across the wreckage. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped out of my cab, flashlight in hand. The air was unnaturally still, and the silence felt oppressive, like the world was holding its breath. I approached the wreck slowly, shining my flashlight over the twisted metal. The truck looked ancient, like it had been sitting here for decades. The cab was crumpled inward, and the driver's side door was hanging off its hinges. I stepped closer, peering inside. And that's when I saw them. Two figures, slumped over in the cab. A man and a woman, their bodies tangled in the wreckage. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their eyes wide open and empty, staring at nothing. The man's hand was still gripping the wheel, frozen in place. I stumbled back, my heart racing. This accident, this truck, had been here for years. But there was no way those taillights should have still been working. No way anyone should have been pointing me toward this. Suddenly, the cold air whipped around me, and I felt a presence behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The man from the side of the road. His whisper echoed in the wind, faint but unmistakable. "Help us." I didn't stay to find out what he meant. I ran back to my rig, jumped inside, and sped off down the highway without looking back. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I drove until the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. I never took that route again. And to this day, I wonder about that wreck, about the ghosts on that lonely stretch of highway, waiting for someone to find them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story, and if you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales from the road. I post new stories regularly, so make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss out. If you have a story you'd like to share, remember to send it through the link in the description. And if you want more right now, check out some of my other videos. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.